Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I am joined by Dan Zehr, host, co creator, and brand director of Coffee with Kenobi, to discuss our experiences with and the legacy of the Phantom Menace in honor of its 25th anniversary. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our T Public store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost conversations. Welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, everybody. We have another action-packed heavy hitter of an episode for you this week as we continue our three-part look at the legacy I should say, perhaps, of the Phantom Menace in honor of its 25th anniversary. And for this, I hope you listened to last week's episode with Silver, aka Star Wars Thrifting, and if not, go check that one out for sure. This week, we've got my dear friend and podcast mentor, my godfather of all things podcasting, Dan Z from Coffee with Kenobi, the host of that incredible podcast over there, one of the co-founders and the brand director of that incredible podcast. So be sure to also subscribe to his podcast and all the cool stuff that he's doing. So I know he just recently interviewed on My Best, and he's always got cool things going on there with the CWK Cafe and the community that's created over there. Check it out. If you're a fan of Star Wars, you will not miss out on some goodness. Trust me. It is incredible. So be sure to go check that out and have a good time doing all of that too. This is also a pre-recorded episode, and this segment is pre-recorded. So I have no idea what news has come out in the past week in the Star Wars and Lucasfilm adjacent galaxy. So, because of that, anything that has happened recently, hopefully there's some cool stuff with the Acolyte coming out and all that, and Phantom Menace being in theaters, and I hope you got to see it, and Bad Batch ending. All that stuff is going on in the world. If there's anything really newish, we'll cover that in June when we're back to recording regular weekly episodes and all that stuff. But without further ado, let's get into the conversation itself, because this is a really excellent one. Dan has wonderful perspectives on this movie and his journey with it, which I think will blow some of you away. I can't wait for y'all to hear it. So let's get into it right now. Here is our conversation on the Phantom Menace in honor of its 25th anniversary. You know the drill. Have fun. Enjoy the Force Ghost Conversations, and we'll be back very soon with part 3, but part 2 first. So go listen to it now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. We are celebrating the Phantom Menace for the 25th anniversary here. Yes, episode 1. We are going back to the beginning of the Skywalker saga. And as you know, we're doing a kind of a month of exploratory stories and experiences and just having a great chat and conversation with a ton of people, great Star Wars fans, about this incredible installment in Star Wars. And of course, I had to reach out to my good buddy, probably my podcast mentor, my Jedi master teacher in this podcasting game. I, of course, went to none other than co-founder and host of Coffee with Kenobi, Dan Z. Dan, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, and how are you doing, my friend?
Hello, Anthony. What a lovely introduction. That's very, very kind of you. But you know what? I learn so much from you and how you conduct yourself, and your show continues to inspire and educate, and it's just a lot of fun. And I think we talked, I don't know, years ago, probably.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years at this point. Yeah,
isn't that crazy? And as you've been evolving, and you just want to make like a cozy, great little atmosphere to talk Star Wars, and that mission accomplished, my friend. So I'm just delighted to be back.
Well, it's my pleasure as always to have you on this show. And what a movie to chat about here, because like I said, I consider you to be my Qui-Gon in many regards when it comes to this. And I'm the Obi-Wan Kenobi learning from you, but your journey is not that of Qui-Gon's, of course. You are on a different path here when it comes to this movie. And I want to start at the beginning for you, Dan. I want to go back to 1999. And what really set the tone for us here. What
Mhm.
was it like back then? What was the anticipation like for this movie? As a fan of the original trilogy, and you grew up with those movies, now it's announced that there's this new wave of films coming out, starting and a prequel too to the original films. How did that feel as a fan? Take us back to 1999.
Sure, boy. This movie means a lot to me for a lot of reasons. If I go back in the Wayback Machine, the last time that Star Wars was released on VHS,
Mm-hmm.
there was a big campaign once more for the last time, and it was at the beginning of each of the 3 episodes of the trilogy. George Lucas sat with Leonard Maltin. And in each of those episodes, those interviews, we just sat there and we watched them over and over again. And George gave little Easter eggs into what the future of Star Wars might look like, and there was
Wow.
confirmation that what he was doing, and there was no time frame per se. And this was before the internet, which are pretty close to around the internet sort of began to become more more of a prevalent thing because it happened in the mid 90s. But this was really when you didn't really get a lot of your information from the internet. In fact, I remember listening to a guy on an Orlando talk show station.
Mm.
His name was Ed Till, and he was a shock jock, but he was very entertaining to listen to. And I remember him saying, "I don't believe anybody who believes anything from the internet." And he would hang up on people. So that was where the internet sort of was then, right? So Star Wars information came from lucky things like that. It came from Star Wars Insider.
Right.
Uh, and then it came from just the news. So one day, we're watching TV, and there's a commercial that on Entertainment Tonight there's going to be a trailer for the brand new Star Wars movie, and it was, to me, in my mind, the single greatest trailer of all time, as the original Phantom Menace trailer,
Really?
and it dropped, and just quick, and at the end, this red-faced monster with horns on his head had a
Mm.
double-bladed red lightsaber, and no one knew what his name was. It wasn't until later on that same program they said, "Hey, this guy's name is Darth Maul. He's the new Darth Vader." And Anthony, our minds started to reel. We were, and I say we, I'm speaking collectively for Star Wars fans,
Yeah.
which is a silly thing to do because you should never do that. But the people in my circle, we were so excited because we were getting new Star Wars. We were going to
Mm.
get to see the story of how Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader. Didn't know anything about it. We knew that there was a little boy that was going to be Anakin. We knew that Liam Neeson was going to be in it. And that was about it. But to say we were
Wow.
excited was an understatement. And there was, see, I'm a dream guest, Anthony. You asked me one question, I talked for an hour and a half.
I love it.
It's like having Jim Hill on the show. And so USA Today had a daily column, like a Star Wars countdown. It's so funny you're drinking out of a Pepsi can because we used to go to stores and get Pepsi cans because they had
Oh,
different Phantom Menace
it,
characters on them.
this is certainly the reason why I was having a Pepsi Zero for this conversation.
So good, so good. And so I subscribed to USA Today just so I could get that daily Star Wars fix. It would just be trivia about the original trilogy or different things. We're going into production of Episode 1 and things like that. So yeah, everybody was on top of the world. I think Star Wars ages better when there's less of it. And this is a
Mm.
fantastic example of that because between 1983 to 1999 is a really long time to not see a movie.
Yeah. That's incredible, Dan. I mean, you've done such a great job painting the picture of what 1999 looked like in the anticipation for this.
That's the
Uh,
only thing I'm good at is babbling about Star Wars. That's it. That's it.
we it's not it's a great thing that you're able to have this recollection of this time frame. Like, I just could imagine just the anticipation of like seeing on ET, right? That a new
Mhm.
trailer is coming out, right? And just like basically setting time on your calendar, right? Whatever 6 o'clock Central Time, right? Whatever comes on out there, and you're like, I must be glued to the television for this.
Mhm. And we record it with our handy little VCRs.
And that
Yeah.
too, right?
Yes.
Another aspect of the
Yes.
time. And I don't know if Star Wars, they just release trailers on the social media sites and on YouTube these days. It's not really too often that they debut a trailer unless it's like at a celebration or a large gathering like that. I think maybe the last time that they did something like that might have been, I think, with Rogue One. I think on Good Morning America they released like the new trailer or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the last time I can recollect
Or
something
Monday
like
Night
that.
Football would sometimes have a cool like, hey, here's a trailer for The Mandalorian.
Yes. Like, oh, you're absolutely right. I forgot that one. Yes, I think The Mandalorian was the last Monday Night Football one. And also, probably I think did that too for Rise of Skywalker, concurrently too, with Monday Night Football, which makes sense. The ABC synergy of it all. But that's a conversation for a different day. So Dan, you're obviously excited about this movie. You're very hyped for it. Your anticipation is through the roof. Now, what's the first time you see this movie in the cinema? What's it like? What are your memories of that first viewing experience?
Well, ask me later about the toy hype, because that was pretty huge too.
Oh, that too. Yes, absolutely.
So before it happened, this was before, like, if you wanted to go and get movie tickets, you camped overnight or you got there incredibly early in the morning. And I had a license plate then. It was STWRS 23, so Star Wars 23, because the Bulls were in their heyday, and
that's perfect. You're just mixing all together some cool stuff.
Worlds colliding in the best way possible. So I drove to the theater and got tickets. I think I got tickets to see the movie, the opening, the first showing, and then later in the night too. So I went in the morning with my friends, and then I went at night I took my family when my mom got off work, took my brother, whatever. But before that, they had a special showing the night before, a midnight showing, which this was kind of like the onset of this whole phenomenon. Now a midnight showing means 6:00 the night before.
Yep.
But it actually meant right. So it actually meant a midnight showing, but they weren't selling tickets. You had to win them through a radio station. So not only did you have to answer a question right, but you had to call in. So I called in and I got through. And the question was, what was the original working title, disguised title for filming Return of the Jedi? And I said, Blue Harvest.
Yeah, you knew
and
that.
And I won, of course. And I knew I won 2 tickets to see the midnight showing. And it was like winning a lottery, my friend. I was ebullient. I was through the roof. I was lousy excited. I was so excited. I could not, I think this is actually why whenever I say on Coffee with Kenobi, expectation without regulation equals fan constipation. I think this is where that saying evolved, because I was so insanely hyped. It started, I watched it, and I remember being about an hour in thinking, uh-oh, this isn't feeling the way I hoped it would feel. And then it was over. And the person I was with looked at me. I didn't say anything. I walked out of the theater. Everybody's happy. I get in the car. I put on my seatbelt. And the person next to me said, well, what'd you think? And I said, I don't think I liked it. And I put my hand on my head and I put my head down. And I was so affected. And I went home that night.
Okay.
And I couldn't sleep. And look, when it's bedtime, I could sleep through a typhoon. Nothing would affect me, but I could not sleep. I kept thinking about it. And I woke up. This is a true story. Probably I needed medication. I woke up, I looked at the wall, and I said to myself, I'm being stupid. This is a Star Wars movie. I'm going to take a step back. And I knew I was going to see it that morning. I'm going to see it again. I saw it again. I loved it. And I haven't looked back. I think I saw that movie in theaters 19 or 20 times. Including in a drive-in. I mean, I'll be taking my son to see it here in at the time of this recording, it'll be a couple of weeks and it comes out in theaters again for the 25th anniversary. And I think it's tremendous. And there's some interesting things. When I went and saw it in theaters, it came out, probably 10 years ago. And I took my older boys who were very young. Well, now they're at that time, they're probably 6th and 8th grade. And every time Jar Jar was on screen, they laughed so hard. They laughed like when I watched The Three Stooges. They thought he was so funny. And it was nice to see it through that lens, because I always liked Jar Jar. I never understood the criticism of it. I thought he did what he was supposed to do. Yeah. At best is incredibly talented. I had the good fortune to have him on Coffee with Kenobi. he actually teaches film
Hmm.
too. I mean, he's a really smart guy. Did a really great job to add some comic relief to some pretty heavy themes in that movie. And then another thing, when people would criticize Jake Lloyd, I mean, is it fair to
Yeah.
criticize a child as an actor? I don't think so. Um, but when the way he acted, like when I first saw the film, I noticed that something seemed off. But you know what? I know why it was off,
Mm.
because I didn't have kids at the time.
Ah,
But then I
yes.
take my kids to see it when they're at the age that Jake Lloyd was when he filmed
Hmm.
that, and they acted just like him. And I thought, oh my gosh, this kid is not a bad actor. This kid is the kid, and people don't get it because they're not around kids his age. And I was really pretty moved by that entire thing. So
Mm.
that any of the criticisms that are kind of the general ones, although it's really not a popular thing to so much as it was when it first came out, those things quickly subsided because you had to look at it through the lens of being a kid, because that's how we all are when we fall in love with the saga.
Absolutely, Dan. And this is just an incredible journey to begin with here, right? You're already having this first viewing where you're like, I don't know, what did I just see? You're just kind of like you're hit with this wall of like, huh?
Yeah,
and then you sit with it, and then you go see it again, and you're like, all right, I'm checking my expectations at the door, right? I'm here to unlearn everything that I've learned about Star Wars at this point and just
hmm,
embrace the moment here. And then
right.
you come away loving it. You're having two different diametrically opposed experiences here in the span of what, 8 hours, 6 hours? I don't know
Yeah,
when the first viewing was
if
that morning.
that, yeah, yeah. I think it was like 10 a.m.
That's so incredible. And the fact that we're going to talk a little bit here in a second about like how this film has grown for you over the years, and you've already addressed that a little bit here about how like as you've introduced children into your life, and you're able to reflect on this film differently and see like, oh well, he Jake Lloyd is actually, he's like 10 years old, like 11, 12. I don't even know exact age when
It's
he's filming
authentic.
this
Yeah,
movie, but he's acting like he's 10. He's doing exactly what he's
because
told
he
to do.
can. That's right.
And you watch the beginning, the documentary about the making of this movie, and George is like, I wanted this kid because he's a 10-year-old, right? It's exactly what George wanted, and I'm glad that you're able to see what George was cooking here from the start there. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people weren't really grasping that at the time. I know a lot of people have kind of changed their opinions on this over the last 25 years, which is a great thing. And there's still some people
Right.
that are like, oh, that movie, how dare you? It ruined my childhood and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm glad that you were able to kind of just see through the your initial whoa. All that, like the initial like spidey sense that you got, like what's going on here, this isn't Star Wars. And then you're like, okay, let's just enjoy this, let's have fun with this, let's see what George Lucas is cooking up here. And
That
I
really
think
is the impetus for why I dislike speculation, because it just set me up for something that I didn't get. And because I didn't get what I thought I needed, I
mhm,
was disappointed. And that over time, like, I just find that to be a very, for me, that was an immature way to look at it. And that's
mm,
why because my brain is so hyperactive with analysis anyway, I find if I just sort of remove myself from the equation
mm.
and just take in what the creators want to give us, I that works better for me. But if other people like doing that, God bless them.
That's perfect. And it shows your own maturity too, as you're growing with these films too, right?
There's hope. There's hope for
There
me.
is hope
Hopefully.
for
Yeah.
everybody else.
Please let my wife know.
Now, diametrically opposed again, I was
Yeah.
4 at the time that this movie came out. So I have almost little to no memory of seeing this movie in the theaters.
That's
The
so cool.
only
So for you, this is like, wow.
This is like the first time I will be seeing it in the cinema. So this is an
Mm,
incredible time for me personally. The
fantastic.
only memories that I actually retain from my theatrical experience are actually scary things.
Hmm.
So obviously Maul is a big standout for me because that was like
Yes.
nightmare fuel for me.
Hmm.
Sidious at the beginning of the movie, when he's a hologram and he's like, "I will make it legal." I was like, "Oh no!" That I could immediately tell that was a bad guy. um, and I was that right age for Jar Jar. Like that
Hmm.
that was my entryway into this grand space opera fantasy story. Was him doing these like vaudevillian physical comedy things that I just ate up like no tomorrow. Like that was it. And then to find out when I'm older that people didn't like it, I was like, what are you talking about? That was great.
Right? Yeah.
And actually for me, it was a very interesting thing where, especially as like I became more cognizant of the world and like, Attack of the Clones comes out, and I'm a little older at that time, and I'm really diving into these films. And I just never, until like around 2004, I never really connected that these were a part of one story, the original trilogy,
Really?
and then these films. I thought that they were different. That like these were separate Star Wars. This was George Lucas kind of rebooting it and telling a different story, and that Luke Skywalker and his journey
Huh.
was something else. I never really connected that the little boy Anakin that becomes this older kid Anakin in Episode 2 is the same guy that becomes Darth Vader. For whatever reason, I just never made that leap in my head. And my uncle, who was kind of my Star Wars sensei through all this, was like, he becomes that, right? And I was like, what? No, you're kidding. That's terrible. How is that possible? That I'm like that kid. I can't become a bad guy. And then, quite a journey that I had with the Revenge of the Sith launch
I was
then
gonna
after that.
say.
So it was quite a wonderful journey too on that front. So that's kind of where I was coming from at the time on this one. So it's just so cool to hear about your experiences going into the theater, getting that ticket to be in that 12 o'clock showing. What a day. We don't call radio stations anymore,
Yeah,
right?
right.
I know they still give away tickets. I hear it all the time because I turn on the radio every now and then, but I'm like, it's almost like a lost
It
art, right? We
is.
don't go to vinyl shops in droves anymore. We don't buy CDs. Physical media is kind of going out. The niche stores for this kind of stuff is going away. And radio too was another wonderful thing of that
Mhm.
time era, where it's like, all right, the Scorpions are coming to United Center, whatever it was
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
On Saturday night, we got 2 tickets. Call us in. First 20th caller gets them. And you got that for Star Wars, which again shows how powerful that this thing is, this wonderful space opera that connects us across the world. Um, so just wonderful. Thank you for first off for sharing your
Of
stories
course.
on that front. I think that's really
Yes.
awesome. And now we're here at the 25th anniversary, and it's you know it feels like last year it was the 20th anniversary. We're at Celebration
Mhm.
Chicago celebrating
Yeah.
this movie, and now holy cow, 5 years have already passed. So you've talked about this a little bit here, but if you want to add any more thoughts, I want to have the floor for you here then. But how have your feelings changed about this film at all in the last 25 years
I
then?
you know, I've always found it to be something that I enjoy going back to because of those, just like with the original trilogy for me, because of those feelings of nostalgia. And now that we have Mason,
Mhm.
who's, now he's 10, but to him, I can't wait for him to see this on the big screen, but he thinks this movie is just dynamite. This one and Attack of the Clones
Yeah.
because of the action, because
Yeah.
there's a nice relatability to it that is really appropriate for all ages, which really just kind of sings to your heart about what and taps into that
Mhm.
structure, that archetypal structure of what we respond to when it comes to myth. And it's great. There's another memory. This is a bit of a sidestep, but bear with me. There's another memory that people talk about that's quite famous. The soundtrack to the Phantom Menace came out
Yes.
before the movie, and so I bought the CD. Ran out the first day like any good little Star Wars fan in 1999, and I bought it and I flipped it over to look at the tracks, and one of the tracks says the death of Qui-Gon. Yep,
Yep. Qui-Gon's noble
Qui-Gon's
end.
noble end, and I remember reading that, and I remember actually, it's like I remember this is so funny, Anthony, but I remember sitting in my car. I remember what I could see. I was pulling out of where my mom was, because I was older, so I was already moved out of the house, but I was pulling out of my mom's house, and I remember looking at this tree thinking, "Oh, great! I get this got spoiled for me," and I was so frustrated that they would do
Oh.
that. And I know that's been one of the biggest Achilles heels of anything they've ever done, and there's never been anything close to that. But it's hard not to think about that as putting kind of a black
Yeah.
eye because while we didn't know what was going to happen with Liam Neeson, because he's obviously that character is not in the original trilogy, we knew there were going to be 3 Star Wars movies, so we had no idea he wasn't going to survive through the episodes 2 and 3. Needless to say, he did not.
Yeah.
But didn't matter. This I think this movie has aged well. If there was anything that I could quibble with, that I would say doesn't work as well for me, I think the pod race is entirely too long. And if you look at the old
Okay.
VHS copy or the original version of Phantom Menace, it was a lot shorter. But when it came out on disc,
Yeah.
and then now in theaters, it's all in there. And I just think it kind of breaks up the rhythm of the piece. I mean, George Lucas is a master
Hmm.
filmmaker, and I am not. So take that with a grain of salt. But for me, pacing wise, I think it's too long. But other than that, it's great, and you really can't do much
Hmm.
better than Duel of the Fates and that incredible, 3 different battles going on at the same time, which Star Wars does better than anyone. But of course, all encapsulated with this dynamite choreography of the Phantom Menace fight sequence between Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon. Just absolutely fabulous. So yeah, this is a movie I will always treasure. You'll never hear me say a bad word about it, except for that first night when I saw it at midnight. But you weren't even alive then.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Um, this is great because like I love that Star Wars in itself is such a generational thing, right? So you get to have this wonderful experience now with your own son going into the theaters and chatting about this amazing movie that he already likes, but now he gets to see it on the grand scale, the way it was meant to be
Mm-hmm.
seen, the way that we all should see a Star Wars whenever we can. And I love that tidbit about the CD, right? The Qui Gon's
Yes.
Noble End. Like because of that, we now get like I would say we get lame titles for the score of soundtracks, right? It's like Cornfield Chase or
Yeah.
something like that. It's like they give away nothing. They're just like the most laissez-faire titles for musical. Like I wish that like composer could go back in afterwards and then like title them the way that they want them to be once the movie has been out for some time.
Right.
Just like I wonder, did you really want it to be called
Yeah.
Portals in reference to like, the Avengers
Yeah.
Endgame
Yeah.
score? Like come on guys, but it's funny, like that is such a microcosm because of how popular this movie is. And when you release the CD after the movie comes out, don't release it a week before. We've learned a lot of lessons from the release of the Phantom
Yes.
Menace too. um Another wonderful, just again time and place thing about this is that there was a music video for the Duel of the Fates
Mm-hmm.
too that was very popular on MTV. It was on Total Request Live. Carson Daly had to
Yes.
announce it that there's a Duel of the Fates music video coming on at 4 o'clock tonight. So I can just imagine like all the high school kids getting off and going home and putting on MTV as one does back then, and watching a Star Wars music video amidst like Rob Thomas and Santana and other things that Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. Like it's just what a mix of throwing Star Wars into all that. Just shows you how powerful this thing was in the
Mm-hmm.
zeitgeist. I mean, just mind boggling to think that there isn't really a comparison today to how cool
It
that
was,
is.
yeah. Well, we joked about
um
that Pepsi can. Like I said, there was Pepsi, Diet Pepsi. There was a couple different kinds. I don't remember what else, but there are different kinds.
what, like Pepsi
Yeah,
Max at
I
the
think
time too, I
so.
think, right?
But you would buy a 12 pack, and you wouldn't know what one it was, but it would be like all Darth Maul or all Anakin or all Padme. And
Or Rick
yeah,
Ali.
exactly, exactly. I think there were 12 different cans, if that's right. And then there was a special black Darth Vader can that showed the little boy juxtaposed with Vader. And then there was, I think, a gold can, which was the rare one.
Mm,
And I bought so much Pepsi that summer. I had all, and I ordered this special case from Pepsi where you could display all the cans. You'd have a bunch of extras, and you open it and right away, oh, they're all the same, because they're always all the same. You're hoping to get that special limited can. I did see the classic ones at Rancho Obi-Wan years ago. And then
yes.
I remember we were actually boating, and we would go to different docks in Missouri, and we would look to see if there were. And you could just go in the coolers, and there would be like, instead of having to buy a whole 12 pack or a case, they just had them all open, because I don't think people on the river even cared about that, and I just looked through and grabbed the ones I didn't have, and it was fun.
They found the person that
Yes,
did
they
though.
did, and it was fun. Even at Pizza Hut, there were special boxes, pizza boxes, and I would say after I'd eat the pizza, I would save
Oh
the
yeah.
boxes and let them air out. And I found them in the attic years later. I'm like, I have an old pizza box. How disgusting. But sometimes if you were lucky, you would ask the Pizza Hut employee, and they would give you a spare box. Taco Bell, the employees, because it was Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and KFC. Taco Bell's
Mm-hmm.
employees had a Phantom Menace hat. It starts out with Taco Bell,
Yes.
and one of the employees during their shift gave me their hat, and I still have it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. You got to bring that out for the
Oh,
going to
that's
the
a good
theater
idea. That's a good call. That's a
and
good
wear
call.
it. I just remember hearing horror stories of people that like purchased the Mountain Dew and Pepsi cans and all that stuff, and then they had them on display, and then like a year or two, like they wouldn't drink them because they didn't want to mess with like the can at all. And then like a year or two later, they like exploded because they like had it on like a windowsill on display, and then like the sun would beat on it for days and all that. And they just come home to like their whole bedroom just fully doused in Pepsi and Mountain Dew. It's like, oh my gosh, guys, what a fandom we have.
I will say I opened mine and
amazing.
drank them, and then I rinsed them out real good.
That was probably the smart way to do it, to keep them. Or I know that there's a way, like if you didn't want to drink it, like you can like put a hole in it and drain it out.
I tried that, and
stuff,
it was a
still keep the can intact.
It didn't work, at least not for me.
The moral of the story is just drink the soda and then rinse it out, and it's a good soda too. I'll go to bat for Pepsi any day. And I also remember too from this era, because my mom is a teacher as well, and in the teachers lounge they had a Pepsi machine that was the Anakin Skywalker Pepsi machine, and I remember seeing that so vividly, and I just like always would beg over the summer when she was getting her room set up for the next year, and I was drug along with her. I was like, can I have $1 so I can see if I can get a Star Wars soda machine? So there were many dollars and quarters spent in that machine just because of the Star Wars of it all. So merchandising works,
Absolutely.
guys. It does. If you have the right IP and don't be precious with it, because Star Wars never has been. There's a plethora of wild and wacky things that have been Star Warsified over
famously.
the years. Especially with the Phantom Menace.
There was so much.
There was so
much out there for it, and it was that's still kind of a running joke. Like they for episode 2, there was nary anything. I mean, there was, I shouldn't say nary anything, but it was probably a fourth less than all the stuff that came out from Phantom Menace.
Mm-hmm. It was the early 2000s, 1999 into this period. The new millennia was ripe for Star Wars merchandising. It was a wild time. And to John Williams of all, again, this is a special sauce that he put onto this new movie, right? It feels like it's Star Wars, but it's not the original trilogy. And he had such a hard task too. We think George had a hard task, reinventing Star Wars, but John Williams had to reinvent the sound of Star Wars, something that, even if people don't even watch the movie, they're not cognizant of what goes on, they still can hum themes from Star Wars, right? It's one of the most recognizable soundscapes in all of cinema history, and to recreate that, I mean, Duel of the Fates, it's powerful. It's just an incredible way to showcase thematically what's going on in this movie, but also, like, I think of the flag parade to start the Phantom Menace. Like, that's just a wonderful bit of score to get you going and ready for this race that is also a climactic moment of the movie. I love the sincerity and kindness of Anakin's theme, but it's also a play on the Imperial March to Darth Vader's theme. It just goes to show, again, people don't become fascists overnight generally, right? It takes time, and Anakin started off as a sweet little boy on Tatooine that just wanted to do good for people. And over time, and as things change in his life and he's affected by different things and outside influences, those impact him and change him into the thing that he becomes later on. And the last thing I'll say on the score too is just I love the end, which I know people have really hinted at. The Augie's Municipal Band that's playing as they give the orb to Boss Nass and the Gungans. They have that parade, and it's just the Emperor's theme, just in a
Yep.
major key. Which again, John Williams,
Pretty
brilliant
cool.
man. The real winner of all this is the guy that's playing puppet behind the scenes, which I mean, I wonder how you thought about this at the time, or if you caught onto it, or if people were talking about it back then. But it's just like, wow, they were playing chess behind the scenes while we were all just playing checkers watching it. In my
Right.
opinion.
I don't, because the internet was not pervasive and information wasn't spread in the same fashion. The circles I was at, no one picked up the key and the difference in the. Oh yeah, that, I
Really?
mean, I didn't know
Wow.
about that till David W. Collins talked about it on his podcast, the Soundtrack Show.
Hmm.
But I also can't carry a tune.
And now you can't unhear
No,
it.
exactly, and it's a wonderful piece of insight, and shows that there are different levels to this that are obviously ripe for discussion. Otherwise, you and I would be really bored in the evenings. Uh, uh, so that's a cool thing. But no, it was just kind of fun. We'll be watching. We'll be sure to watch your career with great interest, as Palpatine says to young Anakin,
Hmm.
and Anakin shows up with his braid, and it just that was like the hint to us that their greater things were happening. So we get that wonderful piece of dramatic irony, which is where the audience knows what's going on, but the people in the story have no clue. And that was pretty rich.
Yeah, you can see the writing on the wall before it's even fully written. This is a third of
Mhm.
the piece, and you're like, oh, well,
And a
stuff's gonna
terrific
happen.
teaser
I will say
poster
though,
with a young
yeah,
Jake Lloyd looking down with the Tatooine hut behind him, and then the shadow is Vader. I had that hanging in my room. I got
so
it
cool.
from the official Star Wars website when they had a merchandise shop, and it was back when you used to have to call every day to order stuff.
Mm,
And every day I would call to get the 12-inch Darth Maul to see if he was in. Eventually, I got him in a toy
so
store.
cool. And yet 4-year-old me saw that poster and was like, that's a cool kid.
Uh huh.
I know.
Uh huh.
It just didn't grasp that they're connected.
No, and how could you when you're little?
And I will say the other interesting thing about like my experience with this movie is that my friends and I on the playground would chat about like, oh, who's this
Hmm.
Sidious
Oh,
guy?
really?
Like we didn't know that he also would become the emperor, right? We had no idea. We were like, oh, I wonder if that bad guy is gonna like be something important or not. We
How
had full
fun!
conversations about this and speculatory. We had no idea, and this it goes to show how wonderful like different experiences and entryways into this franchise can be.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's terrific. And then when you see the action figures and you look on the back and it just kind of the mind reels.
Absolutely. So, in terms of like new for this movie, I mean, they introduced a plethora of new characters into this saga. Padme Amidala, Jar Jar Binks, Qui Gon Jinn, Darth Maul, Shmi Skywalker, Rick Ali, just to name a few, the master of exposition himself. Um, so, which of these new characters are standouts for you, and why?
So it didn't happen initially because I was so, like many of us of my generation, were so reluctant to embrace some aspects because we didn't see stormtroopers, but they didn't exist in the timeline then. Uh, the battle droids have become something that I absolutely love and treasure, and mostly it's
Mm,
because of the Clone Wars. And when Mason was a little boy, he and I would jump on the trampoline together, and I would talk like one of the battle droids, and I would always fall down, and he would laugh so hard, and so that will always hold a special place in my heart. But of course, it's Qui Gon Jinn. He's one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. Although
yeah.
I joked recently that my top 10 list of my favorite Star Wars characters is almost like the Big Ten. It says as number 10, it's really more like 15 or 20. Um, but Qui Gon's tremendous, and Obi Wan is the least appealing in this movie of all the movies because he's young and abrasive a little bit
Mm,
because he's trying to you know show that he's capable, which is very realistic for the age he was at. But then he has to grow up pretty quickly because his mentor dies in front of him. So I
yeah.
would say those two, but especially Darth Maul and not Darth Maul. I'm sorry, Qui Gon Jinn. But speaking of Darth Maul, it never bothered me. One of the other pieces of criticism was that Darth Maul is such a big deal, but he's not in it. And to me, I thought
Mm,
that's not a bad thing. To me, less is more when it comes to Jaws. when it comes to Darth Vader, and even when it comes to Darth Maul,
Right.
if they're not on it as much, it's powerful. There are no words to describe all the times I went to a movie theater, or even when I saw it in a drive-in. When those doors open and they play the opening to dun dun of Duel of the Fates, and Maul shows up and he takes the hood off, I have goosebumps now every single time, guaranteed goosebumps, because that was so electric. And there's no payoff if he's in the entire thing. I mean, he's in it briefly, and it's
Right.
okay. He didn't have a lot of dialogue either, because that was powerful. And if anything, that's why is he the Phantom Menace, or is Darth Sidious the Phantom Menace? I don't know. I
Mm.
mean, I think I can make a case for both. I think it is
You could.
Sidious, but I think it was effective that if it makes you think it's small, even on the poster, which you can't see, but I have it hanging in the studio. The Maul is like huge, and he's at the very, very top in the
Or he's like
center,
holding it. Yeah.
but he's still not the focal point. But he is hovering over everything, because he's a puppet of the puppeteer.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a long way of saying Qui-Gon Jinn, and to a much lesser extent Darth Maul. Because I'm never a huge Darth Maul guy. I actually like him better in Rebels and in the animated stuff. But you can't beat the choreography.
Absolutely. And to your point too, like I think the expectation was that he'd be a bigger character, but I think that wasn't the point of the
Right,
movie.
it's not
Wasn't
his
Maul,
story.
right? He wasn't the point of all of this. It's not his story. He was, I hate to say it, he was a throwaway character, as was intended
And
by
so was
Sidious,
Boba
right?
Fett in The
He's like,
Empire Strikes
I
Back.
will move on.
So were a lot
Another
of these
case in point,
side
exactly.
villains. It's not their story.
It wasn't their story. He was a means
Right.
to an end. He was a pawn in this great game that is being played. They're all being played by Palpatine. And I think, that's another case of expectation outweighing the story that's being presented, and then letting that cloud your vision and judgment. We could talk a whole episode on Qui-Gon. I think this
Absolutely.
man is brilliant, wonderful. I would argue, up there with Kanan Jarrus as to being like the perfect
I
Jedi
agree. Those
in many
two in
ways.
Ahsoka, you get those three, you're good.
I love the concept of the living force that he talks about, which I think is something we can all take into our daily lives every day, be present in the moment. I love that, like, even when he's facing certain doom he's literally trapped in something. The shields go up, he can't get through, and he just sits and he meditates. He centers himself. I love that. Like it's patience. It's patience in the face of the utmost uncertainty. And I think that's something we can all take into our daily lives again, if we're facing the most stressful situation that we could ever think is in front of us, and just be okay with the outcome, not being okay with the ambiguity of not knowing what the outcome is, and just being like, all right, I'm going to face it. I know what I know in this moment, and this is how it's going to be. I'm trained as best as I can be, and whatever the outcome is, it's going to happen. I've trained that boy behind me very well too. I know he's got my back in case something happens, and we all know what happens in this story. But that patience and that centering, it's all great. It's all just wonderful stuff. Again, Star Wars is a story for 12-year-olds and the 12-year-old within all of us to see these people interacting in this grand galactic space opera and learn the themes and lessons from that, so that we can take it into our daily lives. And I think Qui-Gon really sets the stage for that. When you think about it from a chronological 1 through 9 standpoint, Qui-Gon really just sets the tone for that thematically. In my opinion.
Agreed. And I'm sure you've heard Filoni talk about the fact that he was like the father figure.
And he does great, yeah.
And that's why it was such a struggle, because Obi-Wan is the brother, not the father, and Anakin needed a father.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as Dan is quoting here, go check out the Mandalorian Gallery Season 1. I think it's probably episode 1, where Filoni goes on like a 5-minute rant about the Duel of the Fates and all that stuff. So it's already cataloged out there. You can find it very easily on Disney Plus or on YouTube. And he explains it perfectly about why these films are really great, and especially this particular moment for what it does for the entire saga itself. So, Dan, something that I've heard over the years that has been kind of divisive, and amidst some of the many divisive things that people have talked about over this movie about the years, is about Anakin's origin story and kind of how it was showcased within this movie. So what do you think about the way that Anakin is introduced in this movie, especially as a kid, the Immaculate Birth, all that stuff, being a slave? How did you feel about it at the time, and perhaps have your feelings about it evolved over the years?
I just thought, I mean, obviously, it very much mirrors the virgin birth of Jesus, but that's where
Hmm.
the comparison ends. Obviously, it never bothered me because, and this was before I was a student of mythology and a teacher, but that's
Hmm.
mythic, right? The hero has a
Yeah.
mysterious birth, unknown origins, and it allowed for us to kind of play the, oh gosh, who would the father be? And I never bought that we knew who the father was because the father, even though it's not
Mm.
canon in James Luceno's Darth Plagueis, at the very end, well, there's actually, I'm not going to spoil it, but there's a really wonderful sort
Yeah.
of uh, theory about how that might have happened. I always thought it was cool. It didn't bother me in the least. Even back then, I like questions more than answers, so I didn't need to know everything about it. I
Mm.
think it's great, and I think the more that I have studied myth for over the years, that tracks with these classic archetypal stories, and I think
Yeah.
if he has a father in these stories, then Sidious doesn't have the same kind of impact, and unless he has a father and his father dies, but
Hmm.
then it becomes one of those stories. We already have a Batman, like we already have that kind of stuff. I think it's important
Right.
to try to veer off. Star Wars fans are so interesting, and really a lot of fans of pop culture are so fascinating for many respects. One I think is interesting is we don't want to see what we've already seen, but if it's not what we've already seen, we're not unhappy because it's like what we've already seen, and it becomes sort of a snake eating
Mm.
its own tail. I find.
Yeah, I mean, you just actually just blew my mind there a little bit there, Dan. I full disclosure, I did my senior thesis in college about the origin story of Anakin
Cool.
Skywalker and how it plays out mythologically and just overall for the Star Wars story and how it impacts everything. And the fact that he doesn't have a father in his origin, that's something I've actually never thought about. Like he's never had a father to begin with, so he's already kind of without even thinking about it in a way, looking for a father
It's
figure. He finds it
huge.
first in Qui-Gon, obviously. I think that's for to start there. But I never actually pondered the 9 years and how that might have impacted his being to begin with, right? And that's why it's such a connection to his mother afterwards, obviously. Um,
And why he's
wow,
so
yeah,
desperate
lots
for
to
a
think about
father
there.
figure. Why he feels rejected by
And
Obi-Wan and why he
exactly, and he
finds that in
found it in the
Palpatine, who
person. Yep.
completely manipulates him.
Hmm, brilliant stuff. I mean, there's so much deep deep lore in this movie that even 25 years later we're still like, oh
Mhm.
yes, that's a good point. Which goes to show this is a wonderful piece of mythology, and a great aspect of that is this origin story. And I like that George had the gusto in a way, right? He had the chutzpah, perhaps in a different way, to make him a 9-year-old boy,
Mhm.
right? I think the easy way out would have been 19-year-old, very mirroring that of Luke Skywalker. But no, he's like, let's make him a little
Mhm.
younger and see what that does. That's more interesting to me right now, and for the story that we're trying to present here. So I think that's kudos to George on that one, because that's the scary idea, which is don't take the easy way out just because it's the
Right.
easy way out. It's a very Jedi
Yes, it
trait.
is.
See explore the other side here. See what we got going on here, and again, it just throws in a lot more of Star Wars already. It's always worn on its sleeve the mythological aspects of it that inspired these stories. The hero's journey being primarily the forefront of what the original trilogy is centered on. But to throw in some other religious and other cultural lore bits into this film too, just continues to add to the wealth and plethora of great mythology that exists within the Star Wars galaxy that is palatable for a global audience, I
Mhm.
think.
Well said.
Well said indeed. So we got the pod race, the duel with Maul. I even say the opening sequence with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fighting on the Trade Federation ship are just some of the incredible action sequences within this movie. I know you've talked a bit about the Duel of the Fates itself, and you think the pod race is a little bit too long.
Mhm.
But what other action sequences stand out for you in this movie, if you
Hmm.
can think of
I,
any?
I also like the dioxin gas and just the first time that we got to
Oh, I love
see
that.
Jedi move with speed in a live
Yeah.
action on a big screen. Besides like a quick thing in Return of the Jedi when Luke jumps in the air, or in The Empire Strikes Back when he
Hmm.
jumps up, we do the voice getting frozen in carbonite. That was cool because this was the movie where we got to see the Jedi be superheroes. We never got to authentically see
Yeah.
that over a long duration of time. And that really stood out to me quite a bit. But a lot of the stuff on Tatooine, while for some it may drag, it's the sequences where Qui-Gon is talking about the Force, about bonding with Obi-Wan, even little things like
Mm,
Obi-Wan Kenobi, mean Anakin Skywalker. I mean, no, those are
love it.
so much fun. And actually wrote about this for Star Wars Insider years ago. But even at the beginning, if you look at the old interviews and conversations that George has talking about Star Wars, and if you consider Obi-Wan Kenobi's initial description of the Force, it's an energy field created by all
Hmm.
living things. Okay, that's midichlorians. So when people were up in arms about that,
Right there. Yep.
it was always biological and spiritual, always. And the thing I think is really cool as a practicing and devout Catholic myself is transubstantiation, right? Where bread and wine
Mm,
becomes the actual living presence of the body and blood of Jesus. So, whether you take it as your faith or as a myth or whatever, there is precedent there that the spiritual
mm,
can manifest itself into a physical setting or situation. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
yeah. I love. You came to the right place to talk about midichlorians because I might have anointed myself as #1 fan of midichlorians, and especially now that Bad Batch
Love
has
it.
come out, we've said the
Yep.
word
Name
again.
count.
We're in a renaissance of midichlorian love and rejoice in this time that we live in. And as we get to the Phantom Menace coming on screen, and we're going to hear the word again, Master Qui-Gon, I've been wondering, what are midichlorians? um, I I just have always liked the idea personally, and you brought in some wonderful aspects of how it ties into religious aspects and the mythological lore that associates with it, and how it can be tangible. Actually, I've always thought of them as just wonderful aspects to showcase how the Jedi have actually tried to not monopolize, but to define the Force in
Mhm.
some way. Because when there's a whole galaxy of people out there, they just can't take everybody that exhibits the Force and bring them to the temple and train them. There has to be some maybe dogmatic way, but there has to be some semblance of structure, in my
Right.
opinion, in order to say, like, okay, you've met the threshold that makes it easier for us to churn out Jedi. As we've seen in Ahsoka too, right? Everyone has the Force, but it took Sabine however long it took of training in order just to even push Ezra when push came to shove to send him on his way on that ship there. So I've always been a fan of the concept
Mhm.
itself, and I'm like, this is great. This makes sense, guys. Just sit with it and ponder it, and you're like, yeah, this actually tracks what they're doing here. I mean, school systems do this when they're like, all right, we're assigning certain students to classes and levels based off of how they're doing on test scores and all that stuff, and this is just another example of that. Um, in my opinion, just playing out in the Star Wars landscape. And maybe people didn't like having the Force explained to them in certain ways, and to a degree, I sure.
It's
But this is the Jedi at their height. This is them at their prime, and of course, they're going to have some sort of structure for their systems. This isn't just Luke trying to figure out what the Jedi are and learning about them, and hearing about Obi-Wan and Yoda talking affectionately about the Order, and telling him about like what it is to be a Jedi, and kind of giving him the quick crash course on it. But maybe they had more time rather than just a couple of days and weeks in training. They would have been like, all right, you got some midichlorians in
Mhm.
you. We already know that your father had over 10,000. So chances are you probably have a high count yourself. Which would explain why you and Obi-Wan watched over him, of course, too, and he knew that he was exhibiting Force abilities um, well at a young age, and we've seen that in the comics and in Kenobi too. Um, I like the concept in general, so I'm glad that we're having a wonderful, positive conversation about it, because I've had many non-good conversations over the years about that. Well, Dan, I wanted to ask you about the themes of this movie, and I've already talked a little bit here about what I think Star Wars is, where it's like this: we can take themes from these stories and bring them into our everyday lives. So, what are some of the themes that you take when you watch this movie that you're like, yeah, I'm going to use that in my everyday? You're a teacher, you're going to school tomorrow. You're like, all right, I need something to pull from the Phantom Menace for a theme. What are you pulling from this
A
movie
lot
here?
of it is what you alluded to before, and that's Qui-Gonness. When I did the
Yeah.
book with Amy Raquel, Star Wars, I Am Your Father, um, I I found myself pulling a lot from Qui-Gon because his ideas of,
Mm,
feel, don't think, use your instincts, and as you
so
astutely
good.
pointed out a little bit ago with the fight, when the barriers show up and he just centers himself and he's calm and he exhales and doesn't let himself get all keyed up. I think there's just a lot of richness there and just being balanced and being focused on the
Hmm.
moment, and not at the expense of living your life. I think there's a lot of great stuff, a lot of great stuff there too with perspective and finding a
Mm,
way to find a way without allowing the anxieties and the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to get you down.
yeah. That's great. That's great. Again, Qui Gon is just a treasure trove of of thematic elements that we can take into our daily lives. I mean, he might be the ultimate father figure in these stories in many ways. I think Hayden's a great example of a father too. But Qui Gon really sets that tone and stage for what we can expect to be from a Jedi, but also just from parental figures in general too. I love in that opening sequence too, where they close the blast doors right as soon as they get off the gas clears out and all that, and they're moving in, and they're like, he can't get through, and then he shoves the lightsaber into the blast doors, and they're like, no way, he's getting through. I'm always like, man, Jedi are awesome. Anything is possible. We can do anything if we set our minds to it, and that's exactly. And the music swells at the same time, and I get the goosebumps, and I'm like, this is a great movie. um, and another theme to Yes and on top of all this is and you kind of hinted at this a little bit is the symbiotic
Hmm.
nature of just the way the
Hmm.
world exists, right? We live in connection to harmony of nature, to people around us, and that exists in the film in many ways. So the Gungans and the Boo were people working together, the Senate kind of working together in some way to get to an end in regards to the Palpatine of it all, the Jedi working together with the Naboo, and just all these people just without this trade federation blockade happening would have never probably crossed paths. But because of that, they're able to come together and achieve a good for the galaxy, right? To not have people living under oppression from an evil corporation. And I think that's always something to take away from this movie too. It's like unexpected people when put together can achieve
Yes, a
great things.
classic trope that we see in all the great Star Wars, and it's pervasive and
Absolutely.
pretty neat. A really cool thing because that's we don't all come from the same background and place in the real world anyway. So what a nice metaphor.
I 100% agree. And Dan, I'm at my last question here for our conversation here. And we're at the 25th anniversary now for the Phantom Menace. There'll be another 25 years, another 100 years, 1,000 years with this movie. How do you think that this particular movie will continue to inspire and affect new Star Wars
I know that
stories?
when I started teaching, that my students, this is their Star Wars. This is it because
Mm-hmm.
this is the grand age of the Jedi before we knew about the High Republic, and this is where you get to see why they were so respected throughout the galaxy and why Palpatine was so determined to squelch them, like put them as bugs
Yeah.
on his TIE fighter windshield. So it's I think it's for I have always thought that for as much as some of them the prequels would get um dismissed or maybe were
Mm-hmm.
not thought of as highly. For one thing, it's all kind of the Star Wars you grow up with, but I think the prequels and the Phantom Menace, especially with the Rule of Two, with midichlorians, with things with moving with Anakin and how he gets into Palpatine's radar. This movie has added so much to the lore of Star Wars that we just
Mm-hmm.
kind of take for granted. But without
Yeah.
this movie, we don't have the Clone Wars. We don't have the Bad Batch. We
True.
don't have a lot of the things that make this this massive canvas that is Star Wars. That it makes it so rich.
It's so cool, and I'm excited to see what new stories we get too, because the Acolyte comes out in just a few weeks here, and Leslie Headland has been super vocal about her love of the Phantom Menace and how that's inspired her to create the Acolyte and to see how the Jedi end up at the Phantom Menace and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And we're gonna have a generation of filmmakers that are my age or younger that grew up with this stuff and love it, and then whether they directly or indirectly pull from it in some ways, like they're gonna throw bits of this film into the stuff that they're creating one way or another. And I just hope that those people continue to make cool and interesting Star Wars stuff in the future that continues to expand upon the thematic elements and the lore and mythology that comes and circulates around this grand space opera
Here,
that we
here.
enjoy. Here, indeed. So with that, Dan, where can the fine folks find you online? And if they haven't listened to Coffee with Kenobi at this point, what are you doing, guys? I mean, come on. You should listen to my podcast second. Dan is the number one go to here. But where can they find Coffee with Kenobi and this cool stuff that you're doing with your books and all
Well,
that stuff?
you're very kind, and we're truly Star Wars is a better place because of you and Force Ghost Conversation. So thank you again for having me on the show. You can find Coffee with Kenobi all over anywhere you listen to podcasts. We have the live show on Monday nights now during the baseball season at 7:00 p.m. Central Standard
Oh yeah.
Time. And the podcast comes out on Thursday mornings. By the time this comes out, we'll have released our 750th show, which is pretty amazing. Yeah,
Amazing.
crazy. October 1st, I have the Star Wars Encyclopedia coming out, my 4th Star Wars book. I'm very, very excited about that. And that's really about it. And if you're interested in traveling and you're not able to go to Celebration, Coffee with Kenobi and Mouse Fan Traveler are going to go on the Disney Dream in June of 2025. You can there's the Star Wars Hyperspace Lounge. It's going to be fun. Lots of people have booked already. We got Star Wars fans from around the world, including Australia, that are going to come join us on the boat. So hopefully you can join us. You can find out more at coffeewithkenobi.com/Disney Wish. And actually, for anything Star Wars related, be sure to go to coffeewithkenobi.com.
I second that. Go to coffeewithkenobi.com. Check out the opportunity to go on a cruise ship with Dan and experience all the fun. I mean, those ships are just fun to begin with, but you add a little bit of that Star Wars goodness in there too, and you're just gonna times 100 your fun that you're gonna be having on this to begin with. Are you gonna isn't that the one that has the $5,000 drink at the hyperspace one? Are you tempted? Are you saving your pennies?
I'm sort of tempted, but I don't really like hard liquor, and I don't know if that's crazy. But be able to go to Skywalker Ranch would be pretty great.
There's some great perks with that one, just beyond that too. But it's a hard, like, do you pull out the checkbook for that one on the credit card? that's a hefty amount.
I might have to swim home if I do
that. Well, I hope you don't have to swim home. So I think we know our answer on that one. But thank you so much, Dan, for coming on the show. You're always welcome on the podcast, and we'll look to have you on for future episodes, of course, to chat all the things that we got going on in the Star Wars galaxy. We have a plethora of new stuff coming out in the future here. And for the listeners at home, thank you for coming on this journey with us as we talked about the Phantom Menace. Of course, we got more Phantom Menace content coming your way, of course, this month in May. We're celebrating the 25th anniversary re-release of the film in theaters. So I hope you've been checking it out in your local cinema. And of course, you can chat with us on all the social media sites: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Hive, Instagram, YouTube. Just search Force Ghost Conversations. We'll be there in some way, shape, or form. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode in the Star Wars galaxy. Until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.